He pulled a random sword to protect her. Then it started glowing. Ake adjusted the heavy pack on his shoulders, his boots crunching against the metallic floor of the Aethelgard vault. Beside him, Liara moved with a grace that made the human feel like a lumbering beast. Her skin, a deep shade of azure, seemed to catch the faint bioluminescence of the walls, and her large, dark eyes scanned the ancient inscriptions with a fervor that bordered on religious. Jake found himself watching the way her headtails twitched when she was excited, a rhythmic motion that sent a strange heat through his chest. He was a creature of dirt and grease, a human from the outer colonies, while she was a daughter of the high hegemony. He knew he shouldn't want her, yet the close confines of the dusty corridor made her scent, something like rain on warm stone, utterly intoxicating. "The readings are off the charts, Jake," she whispered, her voice a melodic trill that vibrated in the humid air. "Stay close, princess," Jake replied, his hand hovering near the pulse pistol at his hip. "This place hasn't seen a living soul in 5,000 years, and I don't intend for us to be the ones who stay here forever," he added, moving a step ahead to shield her from the unknown. Liara reached out, her slender fingers brushing against his muscular forearm, her touch light yet searing. The contrast between his tanned, scarred skin and her smooth, sapphire complexion was a visual reminder of the vast distance between their species. Jake felt his pulse quicken, not from the danger of the tomb, but from the weight of her gaze. He turned to look at her, finding her face inches from his. The air between them grew thick, charged with a tension that had been building since they left the transport. "I trust you," she said, stepping even closer until her chest nearly brushed his. "I know you do," Jake muttered, his voice dropping an octave as he fought the urge to pull her against him right there in the shadows. The silence of the vault was suddenly shattered by the screech of grinding metal. Jake spun around, drawing his weapon as a heavy blast door at the end of the hall began to cycle open. Through the opening, the silhouette of a tall, thin alien appeared, flanked by a dozen combat droids. Sella, a high-ranking enforcer from the rival syndicate, stepped into the light with a cruel smile. She held a disruptor rifle leveled at Jake's chest, her eyes gleaming with the prospect of claiming the vault's treasures for herself. "Step away from the console, human," Sella commanded, her voice echoing harshly against the ornate walls. "You've done the hard work of opening the path, but your services are no longer required," she sneered, motioning for her droids to advance. Jake felt Liara press against his back, her small hands clutching his vest as she trembled. He knew his pulse pistol wouldn't be enough to take down a squad of shielded droids. His eyes darted around the room, searching for a tactical advantage, an exit, or a weapon. In the center of the chamber stood a raised dais, and atop it sat a simple, unadorned hilt made of a dark, matte material. Desperation took hold as the droids raised their weapons to fire. "Get down," Jake yelled, shoving Liara behind the stone pedestal. He lunged for the hilt, his fingers wrapping around the cold metal just as the first volley of red plasma scorched the air where he had been standing. Sella laughed, a cold, mocking sound that filled the room. She didn't see the human as a threat, only as a scavenger playing with toys he couldn't understand. Jake gripped the hilt with both hands, bracing for the end, but as his skin made contact with the ancient alloy, a sharp sting pricked his palms. "It's over, scavenger," Sella shouted, aiming for his head. Suddenly, a hum deeper than any engine vibration shook the entire structure. The hilt in Jake's hand didn't just activate, it roared to life. A blade of white-hot plasma erupted from the base, stretching 3 feet into the air and illuminating the dark vault with the intensity of a sun. The light was so bright it forced Sella and her droids to recoil, their sensors overloaded by the sudden energy surge. Liara gasped from her position on the floor, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe as she watched the Sun-Eater respond to the human. "What is this?" Liara cried out, shielding her face from the brilliance. "I have no idea," Jake growled, but he felt a sudden, strange connection to the weapon. It wasn't magic, it was an interface. The hilt was pulsing in time with his heartbeat, feeding off his bioelectrical field. He felt a surge of strength, a clarity of purpose that he had never experienced before. The sword wasn't just a tool, it was a part of him. He stepped forward, the weight of the blade feeling non-existent in his hand. Sella screamed an order to fire, but Jake moved with a speed that seemed to defy the limits of his biology. "Destroy him," Sella shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. The droids opened fire, but Jake didn't dodge. He pivoted, the blade spinning in a blur of light that deflected the plasma bolts back at their sources. One droid exploded, then another, as the humans systematically dismantled the squad. The Sun Eater hummed a low, predatory tune as it sheared through reinforced armor as if it were paper. Liara watched him, her breath hitching in her throat. He wasn't just fighting, he was performing a lethal dance of fire and steel. "How are you doing that?" Sella demanded, retreating toward the exit as her forces crumbled. "I guess I just have the right touch," Jake retorted, his voice sounding like grinding gravel. He lunged, the distance between him and Sella disappearing in an instant. The enforcer tried to raise her rifle, but the glowing blade severed the barrel before she could pull the trigger. She fell back, staring up at the human who now towered over her, the light of the sword casting long, jagged shadows against the wall. Jake didn't kill her. He simply pointed the tip of the blade at her throat, the heat from the plasma singeing the air. Sella turned and fled into the darkness of the corridor, her pride shattered along with her droids. "Jake," Liara whispered, standing up slowly and approaching him. He deactivated the blade, and the room plunged back into a dim, amber glow. The hilt remained warm in his hand, a lingering hum vibrating through his bones. Jake turned to her, his chest heaving, his adrenaline-fueled focus slowly shifting back to the woman before him. He saw the way she looked at him, not as a scavenger, but as something ancient and powerful. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by a raw, unadulterated desire that mirrored his own. "Are you hurt?" Jake asked, stepping toward her. "No," she replied, reaching out to touch the hilt still gripped in his hand. "That weapon, it's a Starkey. My people have spent centuries trying to find one. But they are soul locked. Only the architects could wield them," she explained, her voice trembling. "And they were human?" Jake asked, the weight of the revelation settling on him. "They must have been," Liara said, her hand moving from the hilt to his chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of his heart. The danger was gone for the moment, but the atmosphere in the vault had changed. The air felt heavy, charged with the lingering ozone of the blade and the mounting heat between them. Jake dropped the hilt into his belt and reached for her, his large hands framing her face. He could see the pulse jumping in her neck, her blue skin flushed with a dark violet hue. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her lips parting as she exhaled a shaky breath. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, though his body made no move to leave. "I don't want to leave yet," Liara murmured, her hands sliding up his arms to rest on his shoulders. He didn't wait for another word. Jake pulled her to him, his mouth crashing against hers in a kiss that was as much a claim as it was a release. It was desperate and hard, fueled by the near-death experience and the sudden realization of his heritage. Liara responded with a ferocity that surprised him, her fingers digging into his back as she pulled him closer. They were in the heart of a dead civilization, but in that moment, the only thing that mattered was the heat of their bodies. "You're more than I thought you were," she whispered against his lips, her breath hot and sweet. "I'm just a man, Jake," he replied, his voice thick with need. "No, you are the fire that lights the dark," she said, unfastening the tactical buckles of his vest. They sank to the floor, the cold metal of the dais forgotten as they sought the warmth of each other. Jake explored the curves of her body with a reverence he hadn't known he possessed, while Liara marveled at the sheer vitality of the man who had saved her. Every touch was an exploration, every groan a testament to the bridge they were building between their species. "Stay with me," Liara gasped, her head falling back as he kissed the sensitive skin of her throat. "Always," Jake promised, his hands moving with a confidence that made her blood sing. Hours seemed to pass in the dim light of the vault, the outside world and Sella's betrayal forgotten. They lay together in the aftermath, the silence of the tomb now a peaceful shroud. Jake held her close, his chin resting on the top of her head, the Sun Eater hilt lying within reach. He knew that the news of what had happened here would spread. The Syndicate would come for him, and the hegemony would want to study him. He was no longer just a scavenger. He was the key to a power that could change the fate of the galaxy. They will come for us, won't they? Liara asked, her voice soft and worried. Let them come, Jake said, tightening his grip on her. I've spent my life running from shadows, but now I have the light on my side, he added, glancing at the dark hilt. And me, she reminded him, looking up with a smile that could rival any star. Jake leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness that stood in stark contrast to the violence of the hour before. He felt a sense of duty he had never known, a desire to protect not just this woman, but the legacy he had inherited. If humans were the architects, then it was time they reclaimed their place among the stars. He wasn't sure how he would do it, but he knew that as long as Liara was by his side, he wouldn't fail. We should move, Jake finally said, helping her to her feet. They gathered their gear, the ancient vault feeling less like a tomb and more like a temple now. As they moved toward the exit, Jake felt the hilt at his side, a constant weight that reminded him of who he was. They reached the outer doors, and the harsh light of the desert sun spilled into the corridor. He looked at Liara, her blue skin shimmering in the natural light, and he knew their journey was only beginning. Ready? He asked, offering her his hand. With you, Jake, I am ready for anything, she replied, interlocking her fingers with his. They stepped out into the blinding heat, two figures against the vast horizon of a world that was no longer quite so foreign. Behind them, the vault hummed one last time, a silent acknowledgement of the master who had returned. Jake led the way toward their ship, his mind already calculating the path ahead. He would teach the galaxy what it meant to face a human, especially one who carried the sun in his hand and a scholar in his heart. What's our first move? Liara asked as they reached the boarding ramp. We find Cashin, Jake decided, referring to his old contact in the Resistance. If we're going to start a war, we might as well have some friends, he said, throwing a wink her way. A war, she echoed, a spark of excitement in her eyes. A revolution, princess, he corrected, pulling her into the ship. The engines roared to life, and the dust of Aethelgard was kicked up in a massive cloud as the vessel broke orbit. Jake sat at the pilot's chair, his hands steady on the controls. He could feel Liara standing behind him, her presence a calming force amidst the chaos of his thoughts. He looked at the hilt sitting on the console, its dark surface reflecting the stars. He reached out and touched it, feeling a faint warmth. He was no longer just a scavenger anymore. He was the vanguard. The galaxy isn't ready for us, Liara laughed, resting her hand on his shoulder. Maybe not, Jake agreed, as he engaged the jump drive. But they're going to see us coming, he added, as the stars stretched into long white lines. The ship vanished into hyperspace, leaving the silent ruins of the past behind. In the cockpit, the air was still warm with the lingering connection between the two lovers. Jake knew the challenges ahead would be immense, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't just surviving. He was living for a purpose. And as the Sun Eater sat dormant on the dash, waiting for the next time its master would call, the legend of the human who woke the stars began to spread across the cosmos. You're thinking about the sword again, Liara noted, sliding into the co-pilot's seat. I'm thinking about the man who holds it, she clarified, reaching across to squeeze his hand. He's a lucky man, Jake said, turning his gaze from the void to her. He's a hero, she insisted, and for once he didn't argue. The journey was long, but they had time. They had the secrets of the architects, the power of the sun, and a bond that had been forged in the fire of battle. Jake watched the navigation monitors, his heart full. He had found more than a weapon in that vault. He had found his soul. And as they hurtled through the blackness of space, he knew that the light of humanity would never be extinguished again. Get some rest, Liara, he suggested softly. Only if you come with me, she countered, her eyes twinkling with that familiar, suggestive spark. Well, I can't say no to that, Jake admitted, locking the autopilot. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, the strength of his embrace a promise of safety and passion. As they walked toward the sleeping quarters, the ship hummed around them, a steady, rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo the heartbeat of a new era. The scavenger and the scholar, the human and the alien, together they were the bridge to the future. And in the quiet of the ship, under the glow of 1,000 distant suns, they found their own piece of heaven. I love you, Jake, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Liara, he replied, his voice a steady anchor in the night. They fell asleep in each other's arms, two souls bound by destiny and fire, while the galaxy waited for the dawn of the human age. The sword remained on the console, a silent sentinel, its matte surface catching a stray beam of starlight. It was a simple object, yet it held the weight of an empire. And in the hands of a man who had everything to lose and everything to gain, it was the most dangerous thing in the universe. The story of Jake and Liara was just beginning, but the ending was already written in the stars.